My hometown has a weird name, Spectral Lakes. Sounds like something from a horror movie, right? Well, that's because the stories they tell here are scarier than any movie. The town is small, nestled between a few old hills and a dark, sprawling forest. But the real stars of the show are the lakes. There are two of them, connected by a narrow, winding stream. The main one, where everyone swims, is called Lullaby Lake. They say the name comes from an old legend. A story about a mother who sang to her child by the water's edge, long, long ago. It sounds sweet, but the story doesn't have a happy ending. People in Spectral Lakes love their ghost stories. They talk about them at the grocery store, at the barber shop, everywhere. Every shadow is a potential phantom, and every creak in an old house is a spirit trying to say hello. Or maybe, trying to say goodbye. The town thrives on its spooky reputation, especially during tourist season. They sell t-shirts with cartoon ghosts on them and host a spectral festival every October. But for those of us who grew up here, the stories feel a little too real. We know the dark spots to avoid, and the paths you don't walk down after sunset, especially the paths that lead to Lullaby Lake. Lullaby Lake itself looks innocent enough during the day. The sun sparkles on its surface and you can see kids splashing near the shore. But as the sun begins to set, the lake changes. The water turns a deep, inky black and a strange mist often rolls in, thick and cold. The old-timers say the mist is the breath of the lake's ghost. They call her the Weeping Woman. They say she's still searching for something she lost in the deep dark water. Something precious. They say she's been searching for a very, very long time, and sometimes she gets lonely down there in the cold. The legends are a part of life here. You learn them before you learn to ride a bike. The story of the Weeping Woman is the most famous one. She was the mother from the lullaby. Her child, so the story goes, slipped into the water while she was singing. She dove in after him, but neither of them ever came back up. Now her spirit haunts the lake. They say on quiet nights, if you listen very closely, you can still hear her humming that sad old lullaby. A song meant to soothe, but one that now only brings a chill to your bones. A warning. I hadn't planned on coming back to Spectral Lakes after my first year of college. I wanted to get away from the small-town rumors and the creepy campfire tales. But my plans fell through, and my mom needed help around the house. My dad had passed away a couple of years ago, and it was just her and my younger brother Leo. He's 10 years old and thinks every ghost story is the coolest thing ever. He doesn't understand the fear. Not yet, anyway. So I packed my bags, came home, and found myself looking for a summer job. It was the only way to help with the bills. Naturally, the best-paying summer gig in town was being a lifeguard at the Lullaby Lake summer camp. I was a strong swimmer, and I had all the certifications. It seemed perfect. A whole summer spent in the sun, getting a tan and making sure a bunch of kids didn't get into too much trouble. My mom was thrilled. "Oh, Jake," she said, "it's so responsible. Your father would be so proud." She didn't like the lake stories, but she needed the money I would make. I told myself it would be fine. The stories were just stories, silly tales to scare tourists. What could possibly go wrong? My main partner on the lifeguard stand was a girl named Sarah. She was a year older than me, and had been a camp lifeguard for 3 summers already. She was serious, professional, and didn't seem bothered by the lake's reputation at all. "You just have to watch the kids, Jake," she told me on my first day. "Don't worry about the hocus pocus." The other lifeguard, a goofy guy named Mike, joked about everything. He'd pretend to see sea monsters and would make ghost noises to scare the younger kids. I tried to adopt his attitude. It was just a lake, just a job. But even with my new, relaxed mindset, it was hard to ignore where I was. Every morning driving to the camp, I'd pass the old crooked sign that read, "Welcome to Lullaby Lake." The paint was peeling, and it looked like it was leaning, tired from holding up the weight of all those stories. My little brother Leo was going to be one of the campers this year. He was so excited. "Jake, are you going to see the Weeping Woman?" he'd ask me at breakfast, his eyes wide. I'd just laugh and mess up his hair. "Don't be silly, Leo," I'd say. "There are no ghosts." A part of me, a deep cold part, wondered if I was lying. The first few weeks of camp were exactly what I expected. They were perfect. The sun was hot, the sky was a brilliant blue, and the air was filled with the sounds of happy kids. Shouts, laughter, and the constant shrill blast of a whistle. My whistle. I sat up high in my lifeguard chair, sunglasses on, feeling like the king of the beach. The water was clear and cool, and the kids splashed around in the designated swimming area, a space roped off with bright red buoys. It felt safe. It felt normal. My worries about the town's spooky legends started to fade away like morning fog. My daily routine was simple. I'd arrive early, check the equipment with Sarah, and test the water temperature. Then the campers would arrive in a noisy, excited swarm. We'd lead them in some warm-up stretches on the sand, and then it was swim time. I spent hours scanning the water, my eyes moving back and forth in a steady rhythm. Little heads bobbing up and down, arms splashing, kids yelling, "Watch this!" before doing a cannonball. Mike would organize games of Marco Polo, his voice booming across the lake. It was everything a summer camp should be: fun, loud, and completely ghost-free. My brother Leo was having the time of his life. He was a good little swimmer, confident and always eager to show me his latest underwater handstand. He and his friends would build giant sandcastles right in front of my chair. "This is for you, Jake," he'd yell, "to protect you from the sea monsters." I'd smile and give him a thumbs up. Seeing him so happy made the job even better. I was his cool, older brother, the lifeguard. I was the one who kept everyone safe. The thought filled me with a sense of pride that pushed all the creepy stories to the very back of my mind. Even Sarah, who was usually so serious, seemed to relax. We fell into an easy rhythm, taking turns on the main chair and patrolling the water's edge. During our breaks, we'd talk about college and plans for the future. We never talked about the lake's past. Why would we? The sun was shining, the kids were safe, and the water was just water. The weeping woman and her sad lullaby felt like a silly fairy tale from another world, a story that had nothing to do with our bright, cheerful summer. We were just teenagers with a summer job. We were completely, blissfully unaware of what was waiting. The first hint that something was off came from the camp director, Mr. Harrison. He was an older man who had lived in Spectral Lakes his whole life. One afternoon, as a light fog began to roll in surprisingly early, he came down to the beach. He stared out at the water, his face tight with worry. "Keep a close eye today, kids," he said to me and Sarah, his voice low. "The lake gets tricky when the mist comes. Makes it hard to see." He told us about a summer long ago when a young camper had vanished from the water on a misty day just like this one. They searched for days, but they never found him. The kids seemed to feel the change in the atmosphere too. Their laughter wasn't as loud and they stayed closer to the shore. A few of them came up to my chair, their faces pale. "Is the weeping woman in the fog?" a little girl named Lily asked, clutching her towel. I forced a smile. "Of course not," I said, trying to sound confident. "It's just weather. Now go on, have fun." But as I looked out at the thick swirling mist, a shiver went down my spine. The water looked different now, darker. The familiar shapes of the bottom were gone, hidden beneath a gray sheet. Later that day, Mike told me a story he'd heard from his grandfather. It was about Lullaby Lake. He said that before it was a camp, people avoided this place. He talked about strange currents that would appear on calm days, pulling swimmers down without warning. He mentioned people feeling something cold brush against their legs in the deepest parts of the swimming area, even on the hottest days. "My grandpa said it's the lake," Mike whispered, trying to sound spooky but failing to hide a real tremor in his voice. "He said the lake chooses. It gets hungry." I told him to shut up, that he was scaring the kids, but he was scaring me too. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I looked up Old Town records online, my curiosity getting the better of me. The screen glowed in my dark room as I read. Mr. Harrison hadn't been exaggerating. Over the past 50 years, there had been a dozen drownings and near drownings in Lullaby Lake, far more than a lake its size should have. Many of the reports mentioned sudden, unexplained cramps or a feeling of being pulled down. I slammed my laptop shut. It was just a coincidence. A string of terrible, tragic accidents, it had to be. But the whispers had started and I couldn't unhear them. It happened on a perfectly normal Tuesday. The sun was blazing, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the water was packed with campers. I was in the tall chair, scanning the chaos of splashing and shouting. My eyes moved from left to right, counting the heads. 1, 2, 3, 24, 25, all present. I relaxed for a second, wiping sweat from my forehead. Then I did another count. 1, 2, 3, 23, 24. My heart stopped. I counted again, my breath catching in my throat. 24. A small head with a bright pink swimming cap was missing. It was Lily, the little girl who had asked about the fog. I blew my whistle 3 times, the piercing emergency signal. Sarah and Mike snapped to attention. I pointed to the spot where I had last seen Lily, a calm patch of water near the deep end buoy. I didn't hesitate. I launched myself from the chair, my feet hitting the hot sand before I dove headfirst into the cool water. The shock of the temperature change was jarring. I swam with powerful strokes, my mind racing. How long had she been under? Seconds? A minute? Every second felt like an eternity. The happy sounds of the camp had been replaced by a terrifying, ringing silence in my ears. I reached the spot and took a deep breath, plunging beneath the surface. The world above disappeared. Down here, everything was green and hazy. Sunlight filtered through the water in strange dancing beams. I kicked deeper, my eyes scanning frantically. And then I saw her. She was sinking slowly, her arms and legs limp, her pink cap a lone spot of color in the murky green. She wasn't struggling, she just looked peaceful. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She was sinking way too fast, as if something was gently pulling her down. As I reached out to grab her, a blast of icy cold water hit me. It was so frigid it felt like a solid wall, stealing the air from my lungs. My muscles seized up for a second. In that moment of shock, I felt it. Something brushed against my leg. It was smooth and colder than the water around it. It felt slick, like wet silk or long, trailing weeds. But there were no weeds in this part of the lake. We cleared them every week. I shook off the feeling, grabbed Lily's arm and kicked with all my might, pulling us both toward the light, toward the air, toward safety. We broke the surface, and I gasped for air, holding Lily tight. Sarah was already there with the rescue board. We got Lily onto it and back to shore in seconds. She was coughing and crying, but she was breathing. She was alive. Paramedics arrived, and her parents rushed to the scene. Everyone called me a hero. Mr. Harrison clapped me on the back, his face full of relief. Mike gave me a high five, but I couldn't feel any pride, I only felt that bone-deep chill. The cold from the deep part of the lake seemed to have latched onto me, refusing to let go, even in the hot afternoon sun. The next few days at work were torture. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened under the water, the way Lily was just sinking, the icy current, and the thing that touched my leg. I sat in the lifeguard chair, but I wasn't just watching the kids anymore, I was watching the water. I stared at its surface, searching for ripples that shouldn't be there, for dark shapes moving beneath. Every shadow looked like a lurking figure. Every piece of floating debris looked like a pale hand reaching up from the depths. The fun was gone. The job was no longer about sunshine and whistles. It was about fear. My nightmares started that week. I would dream I was at the bottom of Lullaby Lake. It was dark and freezing, and I couldn't move my limbs. I was trapped in thick, heavy silence. In the dream, I would see ghostly figures drifting in the gloom. Pale children with empty eyes, their hair floating around their heads like halos. They would reach out for me with their cold, see-through hands. And then I would hear it. A faint, sad melody, a lullaby, humming from all around me, a song that promised not sleep but an endless, watery grave. I would wake up tangled in my sheets, my heart pounding against my ribs. I tried to talk to Sarah about it. "Did you feel how cold it was out there?" I asked her one afternoon. She just shrugged. "Deep water is always colder, Jake. It was an adrenaline rush, that's all." She thought I was letting the spooky stories get to me. Maybe she was right. But when I questioned little Lily a few days later, she looked at me with wide, serious eyes. "The water lady was singing," she whispered, so quietly her mom couldn't hear. "She wanted me to play a game. She said I just had to hold my breath for a little while." A cold dread washed over me, worse than any nightmare. I started to see things, or at least I thought I did. Quick flashes of movement at the edge of my vision when I was scanning the water. A flicker of white out by the deep end buoys, gone before I could focus on it. A dark shape that seemed to dart away just as I turned my head. I told myself it was the sun playing tricks on my eyes, reflections on the water, but the sightings became more frequent, more distinct. One afternoon I saw what looked like a woman's long dark hair floating just beneath the surface for a split second before it was sucked back down into the depths. I blew my whistle and sent Mike out on the paddleboard to check. He found nothing. "Just some algae, man," he said, laughing. But it didn't look like algae to me. The feeling of being watched became constant. It was a heavy pressure on the back of my neck, a prickling sensation on my skin. It was worst when I was alone, doing the early morning or late evening checks. The lake was so still at those times, like a plate of black glass. I'd walk the edge of the shore, and I'd feel unseen eyes following my every move from the water. I started talking to myself just to break the oppressive silence. "It's nothing," I'd mutter. "You're just tired, you're stressed." But the feeling never went away. The lake was watching me, waiting. My fear started to affect my family life. At dinner my mom would ask me how my day was, and I'd just mumble, "Fine." I was jumpy and irritable. One evening, Leo was telling a ghost story he heard at camp, one about the weeping woman pulling kids under to be her new children. I snapped at him. "That's enough, Leo, it's not funny." The look of hurt and confusion on his face made me feel instantly guilty. My mom gave me a worried look. "Jake, are you alright? You love those stories." I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain that I was terrified the stories were real, that I felt like I was losing my mind? The clues were adding up, forming a terrifying picture. The old town records of drownings, the whispers from the old-timers, Lily's story about the water lady, my own chilling experience, and now, the shadows in the water. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was in Lullaby Lake. A sad, lonely, and dangerous presence. A mother who had lost her child and now saw every child in the water as a potential replacement. A ghost who sang a sweet, deadly lullaby, and I was the only one who seemed to see the danger. I was the lifeguard. It was my job to protect them. But how do you protect someone from a ghost? The dread peaked during the last week of camp. The annual Lake Champion race was the big finale. It was an event where the strongest swimmers from the older kids group would race out to a buoy in the deep water and back. The whole camp gathered on the shore to watch, parents and all. The energy was electric, full of cheers and excitement. But all I could feel was a knot of ice in my stomach. The deep water. The race was going right through her territory. I begged Mr. Harrison to shorten the course, to keep it in the shallows. He just laughed it off. "Don't be silly, Jake. We've done this race for 20 years. As the race started, I was on high alert. I stood on the edge of the pier, binoculars pressed to my eyes, while Sarah patrolled in the rescue kayak. I watched every swimmer, every splash, every stroke. My brother Leo stood beside me, cheering for his friends. The swimmers reached the halfway point, rounding the buoy for the return trip. That's when I saw it. A boy named Sam, one of the best swimmers, suddenly stopped. He wasn't splashing or calling for help. He just stopped moving. His head went under and he didn't come back up. The cheering on the shore continued. Nobody else had noticed, but I saw it. The water around him went still. A terrifying, unnatural calm. The second silence. "Sam's down!" I yelled to Sarah, pointing. She immediately paddled towards the spot. I dove in without a second thought, the cold hitting me like a physical blow. It was even colder this time, viciously cold. As I swam, that same eerie lullaby I heard in my dreams filled my head. It wasn't just in my mind, it felt like it was coming from the water itself, a vibration I could feel in my bones. It was a song of sorrow and longing, and it made my arms feel heavy, my kicks weak. It wanted me to stop, it wanted me to give up and sink. It wanted Sam. I pushed through the song, through the cold, and reached Sam just as Sarah got there with the kayak. He was limp, his eyes half open. As I grabbed him, I felt that slick, cold touch again, this time wrapping around my ankle. It was stronger now, pulling me down with surprising force. Panic flared in my chest. I kicked wildly, thrashing against the invisible grip. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was going to pull me under too. Then, just as suddenly as it had grabbed me, it let go. We hauled Sam into the kayak and got him to shore. He too would be okay. But I knew with absolute certainty that the lake had let him go. It hadn't been defeated, it had chosen to release him. That night, the camp was closed. The season was over. The race incident had been officially recorded as a case of sudden muscle cramps. But I knew the truth. I couldn't sleep. I felt a strange pull from the lake, a silent call I couldn't ignore. I had to go back one last time. I drove to the deserted beach under a pale full moon. The water was perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the stars. The silence was absolute. I walked to the end of the pier, my footsteps echoing in the night. I stared down into the black water, my own reflection staring back. I had to know, I had to face it. "What do you want?" I whispered into the darkness. The only answer was the gentle lapping of water against the wooden posts of the pier. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt foolish, and then I felt a deep, profound sadness welling up from the lake. It was her sorrow, her endless grief. Then my own reflection in the water began to change. It wavered and blurred. The face looking back at me was no longer my own. It was pale and gaunt, with eyes like dark pools of sorrow. Long black hair swirled around it. It was the face of the weeping woman. My breath hitched. Her lips didn't move, but a voice echoed in my mind. A voice made of cold water and ancient grief. "He looks so much like him," the voice whispered. It was a thought, not a sound. "My boy." I stumbled back, my blood turning to ice. I didn't understand. Who looked like her boy? Then the image in the water shifted again. For one horrifying second, the face I saw wasn't mine or the woman's, it was Leo's, my brother. The ghost wasn't after just any child. She had fixated on him. The summer wasn't over. The danger wasn't over. It had just gotten personal. I ran from the pier, from the lake, from that terrible message. I drove home in a panic, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I burst into the house and went straight to Leo's room. He was sleeping soundly, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. I stood there watching him, a new kind of terror gripping me. The lake knew him. The ghost had chosen him. The summer camp was over, but we lived in this town. We lived just a few miles from the water's edge. The weeping woman was patient. She had been waiting for 100 years. She could wait a little longer. And now, I was the only one who knew she was waiting for my brother. The mystery wasn't solved. The nightmare had just begun.
All I told Uncle Jung-ho the next day was that I was bored of the job and needed something that paid. He grumbled about it, but I was let off the hook. Though, he did ask me a few times if I knew where Bethany went. She wouldn't answer his calls. I told him I hadn't heard from her either. There was an investigation to find her, but nothing ever came up in the years that followed. Ken doesn't swim anymore, but besides that, he bounced back from what happened really well. He even started getting real good at biking. Resilience of youth, I guess. I'm in college now, and decided to study in Korea. Stay with my mum and her family for a while. Even now I can feel the lake when I'm across the world. I can sense the eddies of the sand move in the ripples of water. I listen to the lapping against the shoreline, Bethany's laugh when she plays with her sister. Sometimes I can hear when Ken throws old toys into Lake Lullaby. He hopes it likes them. Sometimes, late at night, I hear them. Whispers, scratches, soft thuds from behind that door. They're not dead, not really. And every time the lock rattles, I wonder, how much longer before someone else opens it?